Welcome to the Top 10 Garden Show with Ken Lain. Listen to Ken's tips, tricks, and garden shortcuts guaranteed to make your gardens more beautiful than ever this year. Now, welcome your host, Ken Lain.
There's a kind of a checklist that I use this month in autumn, basically sometime in October. It's a big window by at least before Thanksgiving. And really, I try to get these things done before Halloween. So in the month of October is your sweet spot because the weather's so nice. It's so pleasant to be outdoors. I mean, it's just a good time to be gardening. And it makes a few tips now, makes it exponentially more effective gardening for the season to come. So plants will go through winter better, you'll have better spring growth. It'll just be easier for you. And I always start with manure of all things. I know it's just kind of weird, but I'm trying to put my manures on now so that there's time to percolate. I find folks in spring, this is when we mainly sell manure in the spring, but I find it does better when I do it now. So as soon as I get an open spot, as soon as I pull those tomatoes, cucumbers, eggplants, as soon as they get vaporized and I'm pulling those things out, I'm trying to clean things up so that the soil's exposed to cold, to the winter. And then I'm trying to put my manures on so that they have time to simmer and kind of percolate down into that garden soil. I may not till them in yet, but I'm at least putting a 2 to 3 inch layer of manure on top of that flower or vegetable bed. If you're adding some organic manures out there, that's the time to do it. The benefit's going to be it mitigates some of the salt buildup. So especially if you're using raw horse, poultry, you've got access to goat poop or whatever, that's heavy in salt. They haven't quite necessarily been broken down yet or composted. And so they're real high in nitrogen and very high in salt, which can damage new seedlings in spring. If you put it down a season ahead, it mitigates all that. And so just emphasize it, go enough. Now, the manure we sell here at Watters Garden Center, because of who we're catering to, we cater to folks that have gardened for a while. They've got some resources and they're driving nice cars. And I could not put any more stinky, gross, disgusting, gooey poop in a bag in some Lexus or Mercedes, the back of brand new $100,000 pickup truck. So we deodorize it. We compost it for an extra season. So it's composted 3 times longer than most other poops. And we blended it with several types of manures and we cut it with some compost so it doesn't stink. You open up the bag, it doesn't look like poop in a bag, whereas most poop, my skin crawled just thinking about it. This one you do not do that with. So we've got deodorized manure. If in doubt, if you just need a little bit, that's the way to go. If you've got access to free piles of horse or goat poop, go for it. Just make sure it's composted. There's some issues that can happen. So let's start with that, number one. So spread your manures out throughout the yard. Number two, it's time to collect your seed. So if you got wildflowers or zinnias, they're fully seeded right now. If you want to harvest those, now's the time to harvest that and save some for next spring's gardens. Wildflowers are the main one. So I'm looking out the back of my studio right now. I've got this spectacular wildflower patch that's half of its seed heads. It's still blooming really well. And so I'll go out and I'll harvest some of those, or I'll just start whacking them, or I'll weed whack them so that the seed they fly all over the place. And it's a established wildflower patch enough that there's plenty left over for the birds and for next season's flowers. Clean your bird feeders. We are on the migratory path, and it's super important. So some of your backyard birds that you've named, they're going to leave, and they're going south. But there's a whole nother, the birds that are north of us, they're going to use your feeders. They're going to use your yard. They're going to help them to migrate. And so it's kind of an exciting time now through November or so. You'll see a lot of different kinds of birds. And then some birds, they camp out here in winter. You know, your robins and that kind of stuff. They like the jays, they stay here. And so you want to kind of keep them healthy. Maybe it's time to clean up those bird feeders so that you have this fresh seed, fresh food for them. It's also time to clean your cold frames or greenhouses. Sometimes things build up in there. We haven't been using the cold frames. We've been outdoors, but now it's time to start bringing some of those plants back in. Make sure you're not spreading disease by something carrying over from last spring back. Things can perpetuate. So cleanliness is next to godliness. I know that's not biblical. Don't come back at me. I know it's not actual verse, but it should be. As far as the gardener's Bible, it should be in there. Cleanliness is everything. It keeps the bugs, the disease, things from going south on you and spreading. Winterizing your garden. That's really coming down to your ponds, your bird feeders, your fountains, that kind of stuff. They are not going to like to freeze and thaw. And so to prepare that, I would say take the bird feeder top off, put a decorative one on top of that, or a plastic one, or put a I sell more glazed saucers as bird bath tops than I do actual bird baths. And so they're using that because they don't absorb the moisture as easily. And if they freeze, they aren't as expensive. So they're not quite as decorative, but they're darn close. So think in terms of, should I have that fountain running in midwinter? No. You want to pull the pump and drain it, kind of prepare it by the end of October or so, middle of November, when we start to get that real serious freeze and thaw. Ponds, you want to make sure that skimmer box is working. You probably time to break out by the end of the month that pond heater, just to keep things from glazing over with ice. Make sure your fish are happy. The birds can have access to the water. There's a lot of things, a lot of reason for that. Keep your trees and shrubs well watered. Don't let them go dry. So it's not time to turn that system off and let things just go for the winter by themselves. Plants don't do that. They do need to be watered at least 2 times a month. Starting November, so when you start to get your first heavy freeze, go, okay, I can scale back my irrigation, but I do need to water plants at least twice a month, especially if you've got a brand new landscape or new plants, new trees and shrubs you're planting this fall. I encourage it. It's time to plant those, but you can't plant them. They aren't fully rooted yet, and expect them to go through all winter with no water. They'll need your help. And so water things at least 2 times a month, starting November through the winter season. It's important. And I find a lot of rookies make that big mistake. You can start cutting back your perennials now. Perennial flowers mainly, especially if they're diseased or spotted or they're wilting or they're just going to seed. It's time to cut those things back at your leisure. There's no pressure. Go for it. It's time to clean, sand, oil, sharpen your pruners, your shovels, your picks. It's time you're storing some of those things. Don't keep them out there where they just rust. Get them ready and store them appropriately, especially pruners, especially if you've got a really good pair of pruners. Sharpen and kind of grease and oil them. And then, for the love of gardening, fertilize everything in the yard. I've got a couple different fertilizers. The number one seller is 744 all-purpose plant food. It's the original. It's the one that's been out the longest. 20-pound bag will cover about 2,000 square feet. So the average yard might need 3 or 4 bags. Just go spread it out over the rock. It'll go through the rock and the fabric. It'll just get it out there. And winter, the snows and the rains and the irrigation that you have, that will slowly break it down. It will use that food to store in the root structure. So it will use that next spring. It will use that over the winter to form flower and leaf buds. That's what you get. You fertilize now for spring of next year. And then if you've got pine trees, it is important to care for those, especially native pinyon pines, ponderosa pines. Aphids are going to be thick this spring, this fall through spring. It got cool early, so they're going to go crazy, and bark beetle are going to be active. So treat your pine trees with tree and shrub drench. There's a bug killer. You do not need to be an arborist. You mix it up in a watering can, pour it right at the trunk, and the plant will take it up. It protects, it inoculates. It keeps the bark beetle, the tip borers, the aphids out of your pine trees. They're really pronounced, and you kind of treat those in the fall of the year, and it kind of it just protects all that new growth you had this spring. So fertilize and treat with tree and shrub drench. Your evergreens especially, keep them healthy through winter. That's kind of my top to-do list. I get you a copy of that available at the garden center or next class or something. But that's your go-to top 11 things to do in the yard for a healthier fall, winter, and spring landscape.
Watters Garden companion plants for September are Raywood ash, Russian sage, honeysuckle, and ivory feathers pampas grass.
Ivory feathers is a dwarf pampas grass that blends perfectly into desert landscapes.
The ivory plumes reach overhead height for architectural style around patios and ponds.
Well suited as a visual barrier or hedge in the far reaches of the yard.
You will find only the brightest grasses here at Watters Garden Center.
Shop in-store or online at wattersgardencenter.com.
You're listening to garden expert Ken Lain. He can be found throughout the week at Watters Garden Center in Prescott. Thanks for tuning in to the Top 10 Garden Show.